Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, our next topic about utilitarianism is John Stuart Mill. We have already discussed about Jeremy Bentham as a utilitarian thinker. Next most important utilitarian thinker is John Stuart Mill. Period of John Stuart Mill was 1806 to 1873. John Stuart Mill was a most famous and popular philosopher in the history of Western political thought. If we examine his early life, then we find out that his educational career started with the study of Greeks, and he also very interested in other subjects such as algebra, philosophy, chemistry, economics, and history. His major interest was in history. John Stuart Mill also remained closely associated with his father, James Mill. He assisted his father at the age of 11 when his father was writing the history of British India. By this time he was 16. He completed his formal education and then he went to India to work with his father for the East India Company. J.S. Mill started his career as a clerk in East India Company in 1823. In 1856, he was promoted as Chief of Examiner, the post second in command in the Home Service to the Secretary. He held this office till Company was dissolved by an Act of Parliament in 1858. John Stuart Mill refused to accept an offer of a government post and he preferred to retire from the administrative service. In 1865, he was elected the member of House of Commons for Westminster, where he served for 3 years until his defeat for election. So, while examining about life history of J.S. Mill, we find out that during his lifetime, he remained involved in political affairs practically, and he adopted very clear and realistic approach to resolve the problems of that period, particularly problems of industrialization of 19th century. His major writings, his major works, his major contributions as a prolific writer, as a popular and prominent writer, become very famous among intellectual circles and also among different academicians. He wrote almost about all subjects, about logic, sociology, ethics, metaphysics, economics, and politics. His major works which related to politics are: number 1, Logic and Principles of Political Economy. Next, Utilitarianism. Next writing was the autobiography. And number 4, On Liberty. On Liberty was very famous essay of J.S. Mill, and this essay always have been considered as a major contribution of J.S. Mill. He also wrote about considerations on representative government. His this writing, Considerations on Representative Government, also become another popular writing of J.S. Mill. He also wrote about 3 essays on religion. He wrote about subjection of women, about analysis of philosophy of other thinkers. But his major contribution, which always remained under consideration, that is his essay on liberty, representative government, utilitarianism. All these remained a major writings of J.S. Mill. Now I explain you about Mill's views about liberty. The concept of liberty was an integral part of his whole philosophy. J.S. Mill, regarded as a passionate advocate, supporter of liberty, he clearly emphasized that governmental interference in individual activities should be reduced to the minimum. In the middle of the 19th century, due to the utilitarian reforms, the scope of administrative activities increased. Parliament became the supreme and unchallenged lawmaking authority, and supremacy of Parliament promoted rights of individual and particularly liberty of individuals. He believed that liberty was a prime factor for the development of society. At that time, policy of laissez-faire was being abandoned in favor of greater regulations by the state. The people became politically conscious and demanded universal suffrage, and so on one side the growth of the central government of the country increased, and the other side the increase of social legislation emphasized the importance of communal action over the welfare of the peoples. And on the other side, the extension of the franchise of education and the revival of local government emphasized the importance of individual effort. When J.S. Mill wrote, utilitarian liberalism was generally accepted in England. The democratic efforts made by J.S. Mill and earlier utilitarian also had been largely successful, and political power had been extended to a considerable proportion of the population. So, a large number of old evils and inequalities had been removed at that period. In this process, some of the dangers of democracy became visible, and the tendency toward state centralization led political theory to the scope of the state activities and to the liberty of the individual. At that period, J.S. Mill was recognized as a leader of utilitarian circles, and he became most famous utilitarian thinker. Mill also believed that social progress could not be achieved if each and every individual is imparted with fuller opportunity for free development of his personality. This is a very important point of his philosophy, and in this point he clearly highlighted about the importance of development of personality of individuals through liberty. J.S. Mill favored freedom of thought, speech, and action. He also believed in toleration of opinions and freedom of discussion. He had confidence that truth would definitely survive in the struggle of ideas. Mill further explained that freedom of thought and investigation, freedom of discussion, and the freedom of self controlled moral judgment and action were goods in their own right. They roused in him warmth and a favor that hardly appear in other writings. Mill believed as a matter of course that intellectual and political freedom are in general beneficial both to the society and to the individual in the state. So, the real argument for political freedom, he thought, is the basic protection of basic liberties of individuals in the state. So, overall, J.S. Mill highlighted that moral convictions and to take the responsibility for making them effective are more the ways in which responsible human beings are produced, and all these can be achieved through the basic rights and basic freedom of the peoples. During this discussion, we find out many aspects of liberty regarding the development of individuals' freedom. But Mill also imposes basic limitations on the liberty. Number one, the individual was not at liberty to do any harm to his fellow beings. Number two, he must share labors and sacrifices to secure the society or individuals against harm. So, overall, J.S. Mill pleads for certain freedom for the individual, without which he cannot develop his personality properly. And for this purpose, he highlighted importance of freedom of conscience, liberty of thought and of its expression in speech and writing, liberty of pursuits and tastes, liberty of association, liberty to adopt his own profession in life, liberty of religion and morals. Mill, as a greater leader of liberty, supporter of liberty, laid great importance on liberty of thought and expression. His theory of liberty of the individual is based upon most important essential element of social welfare and development of individual. For this purpose, J.S. Mill further explained his most important next theory about representative government. Mill explains that the best government is not that which best promotes the moral and intellectual qualities of the people. General prosperity depends on the amount of personal energy of the individual. Thus, the general prosperity is best done through the association of the people in public affairs. Therefore, Mill says that the ideally best form of government is that in which the sovereignty is vested in entire aggregate of the community, where every citizen takes actual part in the government by the personal discharge of some public function. All cannot directly and personally participate in public affairs, but they can do it through their representatives. So, the best form of government is, according to the J.S. Mill, is representative government, and the best kind is democracy. While explaining Mill's views about representative system, we find out that his representative system comprises three levels. Number one, electorates or peoples. Number two, their elected representative. And number three, the policy making body. He gave most importance to the masses. At the lowest level, there is mass of citizens or electorate to elect their legislative representative. Therefore, they should be capable of making the choice of electing their representative. They must be capable of including themselves in debate, discussion, criticism, and education, which mark limits of popular participation. This level constitutes the base of a good representative system. Second level, he explained, at the second level is at the middle level. The representative elected by the people will have the knowledge and judgment superior to that possessed by the electorate and will have ability to legislate the law which are required by the complex industrial society. Third, at the top level, there is a superior body composed of experts and professionally trained for their task of policy formulation. They are not directly responsible to the public. They should not be permitted to enact legislation on their own authority, but their greater ability enables them to legislate better than the electorate and the people's representative in the interest of the people. It is their duty to submit legislative proposals to the elected representatives who, after debating and questioning member of the policy body, can ratify or reject the policies offered to them for their considerations. So, J.S. Mill's three-level functioning of representative government always remained very important in the concept of democracy and promotion of democratic values. He further explained that the elected representative possess the authority to remove the member of the policy making body as they may themselves be removed by their electorate. However, the power of removal may be misused by the people or by the representatives, but it is necessary to retain the element of responsibility, otherwise, the democratic principle, the democratic spirit is destroyed. While discussing about representative government, the concept of representative government, J.S. Mill also presented his ideas about proportional representation. Proportional representation is also another most important contribution of J.S. Mill at that period. In a representative democracy, the majority party succeeds in securing a large number of seats in parliament in proportionate its number of votes, and the minorities always suffer from underrepresentation. We are discussing very important point that basic purpose of J.S. Mill to promote his views about proportional representation was to protect the interest of the minorities and gave them due share of representation in the parliament. Mill supported the system of proportional representation. It is a system of single transferable vote first proposed by Thomas Hare. Mill was in favor of public vote and was against the vote by the secret ballot as it was wrong in principle. The secret ballot emphasizes the idea that suffrage is a personal right rather than a public trust. It is used for personal advantage instead of general good. Mill did not express his opinion about monarchy, but he considered the second chamber or House of Lords in Britain as a useful body for drafting bill because of its superior legal ability. He was against the legislature or representative assembly assuming and performing the function of governing and administrating directly. Its real function was to watch and control the government, to throw light of publicity on its acts, to compel a good exposition and justification of all of them when any body considered questionable. So, the representative assembly, according to J.S. Mill, can play the role of a committee of grievances and a congress of opinion. Its proper functions are discussion, deliberation, supervision, and control. The parliament should confine itself to the supervision and control of the executive and leave the administration to the latter. This would combine administrative efficiency with popular sovereignty. During this discussion, we can very clearly find out that John Stuart Mill's writings were reflection of the problems, issues that grew out of the rapidly developing industrialism and democracy of England in the middle years of the 19th century. These problems had not been so clearly defined for Bentham and the philosophical radicals, and they had placed their hopes for improvement in a political democracy which strongly emphasized middle class control and the laissez faire economics. These hopes were largely fulfilled, although not in the lifetime of the early liberals, but contributions of utilitarian thinkers, particularly J.S. Mill, promoted and highlighted liberalism and ideas of regarding democratic values, regarding democratic system, regarding the representative system, regarding the protection of the liberty of the peoples. During this discussion, next most important point is that after examining different aspects of his philosophy, we find out that J.S. Mill was at a time both individualist and collectivist. So he played his role also an individualist thinker and also a collectivist thinker. His ideas were determined to promote a representative system and liberties of the peoples for the grooming, for the development of their personality, and he also explained his views in a very clear way on his essay on liberty, that was considered his greatest work. Now I conclude this topic by examining different contributions of J.S. Mill. As I have earlier explained you that J.S. Mill was leader of liberalism, champion of liberalism and individual liberty. He was of the opinion that men should have freedom to express their opinion not because they have natural rights to do so, but because the greatest happiness of greatest number will be achieved in this manner. He not only regarded freedom as a means to happiness, but as an end of itself. In this regard, he differed from Jeremy Bentham, utilitarian thinker. J.S. Mill also differs earlier utilitarian thinkers by explaining his views about moral community. For him, moral community is one in which human dignity is respected, and moral community is made up of free and moral individuals. So, freedom and morality have close relation, they go hand in hand, they are interrelated, one is not possible without other. J.S. Mill was also a great feminist like Plato. And practically, he pleaded that cause in the parliament. He believed for the equality of women for the benefit of the state. He raised the voice for family suffrage. He was the first utilitarian thinker who started movement for the universal adult suffrage including women through the system of proportional representation. This can be considered a major contribution in the history of Western political thought. J.S. Mill was against despotism and he was a great supporter of democracy. He was of the view that democratic outlook is a matter of habit and the democratic system is much better than dictatorship. J.S. Mill supported his next most important contribution is that he supported the minorities and suggested for minority representation. Though it was a grave problem at that time, but he solved it by adopting the system of proportional representation. He believed that unless minorities are properly represented in the parliament, the whole system of democracy is bound to fail. So, he was a true and real supporter of democracy. He also supported the upper house, therefore, he recommended for a second chamber, which was a useful body of drafting bill because of its superior legal ability. He believed that final legislative authority should rest with the House of Commons of Britain, and at the same time he assigned the task of drafting the bills to the House of Lords. Last point of concluding remarks is that J.S. Mill also highlighted qualitative player of individual in the society instead of quantitative player, unlike Bentham. The conception of quantitative player had debased and degraded utilitarianism. By giving it qualitative aspect, Mill has raised the status of utilitarianism, utility, and individual liberty at that period in intellectual circles, among political thinkers, among politicians, and J.S. Mill's theories practically adopted because he adopted realistic views in his philosophy. His major contribution also his views about that circumstances, that environment of industrialism and problems of that period clearly highlighted by the J.S. Mill. So, Mill was not only utilitarian but also a liberal thinker. And if we make a comparison between J.S. Mill and Bentham, then we can find out many basic differences of both utilitarians, but basic purpose, basic theme, Both utilitarians, J.S. Mill and Jeremy Bentham, both emphasized for the protection of people's freedoms, their basic rights, and their moral development, and their right of vote, and overall their welfare activities and welfare protection by the state for individual. So J.S. Mill overall can be considered a major prominent utilitarian thinker of 19th century. And that is the end of our today's discussion.